My guest at this time is Dr. Tim Ball, former professor of climatology at the University of Winnipeg. He's also the author of numerous books on climate science, including The Deliberate Corruption of Climate Science. We want to get his thoughts today on the United Nations suggesting this week that 1 million plant and animal species are on the brink of extinction due to human-caused climate change. But they say it's not too late to do something about it. And Dr. Ball, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, you're very welcome, and thanks for the opportunity.
Let me read a little bit from the Associated Press story here. It starts out by saying, people are putting nature in more trouble now than at any other time in human history. With extinction looming over 1 million species of plants and animals, scientists said Monday. But it's not too late to fix the problem, according to the United Nations' first comprehensive report on biodiversity. It says species loss is accelerating to a rate tens or hundreds of times faster than in the past, and more than 500,000 species on land have insufficient habitat for long-term survival. You've also got folks like George Mason University professor Thomas Lovejoy saying the biological diversity of this planet has really been hammered, and this is really our last chance to address all this. You've got another expert here who says that we are in the sixth great extinction phase of human history, or at least planet history here. So, Dr. Ball, what do you make of this?
It's more of the current hysteria, absolute rubbish. There's not one bit of evidence to support anything they're saying. That Lovejoy, is it George Mason or wherever it is, get him to name the species that have gone extinct in the last 10 years. Get him to give you some names. Don't just say that there's this number. Give me the actual names, and you can't find it. But you got to start with knowing, Greg, that the real experts, the people that are studying these things all the time, will acknowledge to you that we've probably only I found and named about 35% of all the species that are on the planet. So in other words, there's about 65% that we haven't even found or identified yet. Every single week, we're finding far more species than they're claiming are going extinct. And as I said, the extinction number was totally created out of statistics. A biology prof by the name of Wilson said, okay, let's look at this. We're losing rainforest at such and such a rate. And in every square mile of rainforest, there's 4,000 species. Therefore, if we keep losing the rainforest at the rate we're losing it, then we're losing 3 species an hour. Well, first of all, they don't know how many species there are in a square mile of rainforest. And second, the estimates of how much rainforest we're losing are just that. They're estimates. And it's purely a number that they've come up with that then, because it's put out by a scientist, suddenly takes on, oh, this is an actual measurement. It isn't. We've got virtually no measurements of anything. I mean, just a few years ago, they were saying that there were something like 20,000 species in the ocean. Now the estimates are 20 million. So all of this is just pure hysteria generated by the UN because, of course, Trump's pulled out of the climate agreement. People are fed up with the UN. They're fed up with the bullying that's going on from the UN. So this is just more ways to shake the money out of you.
Dr. Ball, I emailed you to ask if you were available for this interview, and you sent me back something you wrote following, I believe it was a 2008 report, essentially saying the same thing. So how long has this argument been around?
Well, it's been around forever. Well, I don't want to say forever. It really starts with Darwin, 1859. And, of course, he was the first one to start determining that there were the number of species. And Darwin's whole contribution to science wasn't the theory of evolution. That's wrong. What his contribution was that he said if you're going to do good science or reasonably accurate science, you need a whole lot of data. And, of course, that's why he spent all the time in the Galapagos and in South America determining the range of species and the types of species and so on. He was assisted by Carolus Linnaeus, the guy that created the Linnaean system. And for the people to understand that, the word species which is defined as a group of animals that can produce viable offspring. Without that classification system, Darwin wouldn't have been able to sort out all the data that he got. But that's where this really starts. And the trouble is that nowadays, and really almost since Darwin, everybody's into finding new theories, and nobody's into getting paid or getting money to count how many animals there are. There's no glory in academia in determining useful and accurate numbers.
Well, as you mentioned, Dr. Ball, you don't believe there's any real science behind these numbers, which makes it, I would imagine, actually harder to rebut because you don't have the data to push back on it. So what data is there to suggest whether there are any species or how many species are in harm's way, or what impact the current climate is having on any species?
Well, the only way you could push back, and you absolutely nail it, and this is, of course, the thing with the climate change. How do you disprove it? And that's the difficulty. But all you do with Wilson, for example, where he's saying there's 3 species going extinct every hour, you just say, okay, name them. That's what I said earlier to Lovejoy. Okay, name me a species that's gone extinct. And of course, they can't do it. Or they'll say, well, there's one that's endangered. This is the latest game. Oh, it's endangered. Well, how do you determine it's endangered? Oh, well, it's a very low number. Well, who's creating the number? Oh, we are. And this is the game that they play, and it's absolutely phony science. It's hysterical science, and in fact, I think it's criminal. I mean, if you think about this, Greg, what are we into but fake news? Well, fake news is lies. Why don't they call it what it is? It's lies, fake news. It's like with public relations. What does a public relations guy do? He lies to you. They're professional liars. This is the world that we're in. And when you actually go and look at any number, virtually any number, it doesn't hold up. I mean, even just to give you an example, I think it was the 2000 American statistic or census. They suddenly discovered they'd missed 12 million people. And the only reason they discovered they'd missed 12 million people was that the government checks that went out to the Appalachian region was suddenly cut dramatically because the number was based upon the population statistics. And they said, oh, well, this is the population in Appalachia, so this is the amount of dollars they get from the government. And Appalachia said, well, hey, hang on a minute. Why are you cutting us? And they went and looked, and they found out they missed 12 million people at that time, the most expensive census in U.S., not just U.S. history, and world history. But this is the rubbish. You hear numbers put out there. I would say 99.9% of the numbers that you hear are not real numbers. They're estimates. They're speculations. And so this is what these people are doing, and they can get away with it. Because, as you point out correctly, how do you counter this? Say, well, as I said, all you got to do is say, well, name them. Don't just give me numbers. Name them.
And I'm guessing you're not shocked by the UN officials and these scientists who suggest that it's not too late. We can still do something about it. The Associated Press story does not quote anyone describing what should be done about it, but obviously we've seen the agenda, whether it's the Green New Deal in the present form or what we've been talking about from different lawmakers here in the United States and around the world for the past couple decades.
Yeah, well, the solution is send them more money. Keep funding the United Nations and the work we're doing, and we'll save the planet. It's absolute rubbish. Absolute rubbish. Or they should shut down the UN tomorrow. We don't need it. It doesn't produce any useful information, and all it does is create data like this to exploit the world. Look at the one they did last October when they came out and said there's 12 years left. And that was a UN report that said that. And here's Ocasio-Cortez and all these people exploiting it and eco-bullying, I call it. We don't need the UN. It's an incredible waste of money. In fact, just eliminate first-class airfare for them, and you'll save yourself about $500 billion a year. So people start to need to understand that just because there's a number, it doesn't mean anything. You need to go and look at the number. Who got it? How did they get it? What does it mean? What's the significance of it? It's one of my favorite comments. A colleague who once said to me that 87% of all statistics are made up on the spot.
I had a coworker that used to use that one too, although the number, of course, always changed. Dr. Ball, always good to have you with us. Thanks for your insight, sir, and we'll talk to you soon.
Oh, well, thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for seeking what Trump is looking for, common sense.
Dr. Tim Ball, former professor of climatology at the University of Winnipeg. He's also the author of numerous books, including The Deliberate Corruption of Climate Science. I'm Greg Corombos reporting for Radio America.